Can you sing a little tune of that song?
Olvidarte de un amor que no se va a acabar, estar con todo el mundo, na 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 na.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 52 of the Iga and Carlos Tennis Show. Love the intro, by the way, but unfortunately, it was not a lovely tournament for either Iga and Carlos. We are going to be a little bit more negative on this one. Apologies for that. Just, they both lost a tough semifinal, certainly in events that we both expected them to do better in. So they definitely did not perform according to our expectations. But we're just coming off fresh of the Super Saturday semis in BNP Paribas Open. And the last match we just witnessed was Alcaraz going down in 3 sets to Jack Draper. Jack Draper, who's had a phenomenal tournament, beating João Fonseca and then beating 3 Americans in a row with the same scoreline, pretty much 6-4, 7-5. All different types of matches, including the match against Fritz, which he just dominated in. And also this quarterfinal against Shelton, where he came back from a breakdown. And then this one was a very weird, funky match, Damien. 2 lopsided sets, and then just some weirdness in the third as well, including a VR call that happened in the third game. Lots to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Such a strange way to lose this. As you said, Indian Wells is a tournament where usually Alcaraz and Świątek are just basically either winning or are among the top contenders. And for both of them to lose in the semis was somewhat unexpected. Obviously today, well, we were even talking about it, I think maybe like yesterday, whether Iga or Carlos is a bigger favorite to win the event from here. And we basically established that Carlos is probably the bigger one simply because the opponents that he has, they're not Yannick Sinner. They're not, top of the top, but he still lost to Draper. And indeed, it was just such a puzzling match. 20 something minutes, right? In the opening set, Carlos loses that, plays can't find the court at all. Second set, Jack is barely moving, and you don't know what is up with him physically again, because that's something that's, kind of a theme in his young career. But then, of course, set number 3, again, we just see Carlos kind of lost and, overplaying the drop shot because he has kind of no idea what to do because the opponent is so solid and so quick. And then basically also obviously playing with a lot of pace despite being maybe a little more defensive. And he just completely lost himself out there in these circumstances. And also the VAR, it added to the whole thing for sure. Like the entire third set, I felt like I was mostly still thinking about the VAR call when obviously the double break happened, for example. I don't think it was quite like that for the players, but in the end, you could say Carlos got robbed there.
Yeah, it certainly robbed him of that momentum, and then the time that it took, to get that sorted in 4 or 5 minutes. It was it felt like most of the third set was consumed by that, honestly.
But it still wasn't enough, right? Don't you feel like Layani kind of rushed through that second call?
He did, yeah. And the first one where he called not up, and then the second one where you don't know whether it was very obvious, and I feel like he messed up on both occasions. So that was a bit of a shame. I wasn't surprised that the point eventually went to Jack, but the next couple of points afterwards, it was just so difficult for everybody to focus, and kind of the break happened very quickly. Draper was just super solid. But my main gripe with Alcaraz in this performance is the game that he played to get broken at 4-2, or rather 2-4. From his perspective, you just should not be getting broken in that game. You're 40-15 up. You have 3 more chances to close it out with your advantage. And I just feel like he overplayed the drop shot in that moment. He missed an overhead smash that he shouldn't have missed earlier in that game as well, before the 40-15. He, didn't put away a couple of drop volleys. I didn't feel like he was very clinical at finishing at the net as well. And Draper, he gives you a little bit of time in the sense that, the forehand, is going to be really big. The serve is going to be big. It's more clinical now as a finishing shot. But Alcaraz in the second set, he made a great adjustment. He went back on the return of serve. He gave himself a lot more height, a lot more time. And he was clearing the net on his backhand by over 47 centimeters. And in the first set, it was 29 centimeters. And he just wasn't playing with any margin whatsoever. He was just spraying all over the place. The fact that it took him a whole set to figure out, well, that's another story. But, the fact that he then raced through the second, he's serving first in the third. He has that one little step up where I still felt like if Alcaraz held for 3-4, it was still going to be difficult for him to come back. But once he went down 5-2, there was no chance for a comeback. So I think that's what's really going to sting about this one is, yeah, the fact that it took him a while to kind of make those adjustments, and then that he overplayed the drop shot in big moments, that he didn't really clutch out that hold, which was big. And yeah, it was a very strange match all around.
Yeah, I mean the 2-4 game, there was a lot of like carelessness there. Maybe not.
Yeah,
I wouldn't go as far as say that like he was getting a bit too cute with it. But yeah, I mean clearly he was just out of ideas. He was ahead in the point, but he just didn't know how to finish it. Usually he's sort of like panic answer to this is the drop shot, and if they are executed perfectly, sure. It's a bouncy court though. They have to be very good, and they absolutely were not. And Jack was just brutal at punishing that. The kind of like the effectiveness of his tennis in the sense that he was super solid, but then when the opportunity pops up, he is also able to like crank it up, obviously. And well, he does kind of like have a big hitter background, even if he is more and more controlly as as the years go on. And yeah, sort of like to once more not be able to handle a player like this on a court that typically suits Carlos, and you're thinking, well, if it's slower, he still has the power, he still has all the tools potentially to get through and a defensive opponent. And yet recently it's not really coming together. He's struggling against someone like Alex de Minaur in Rotterdam. He loses to Novak Djokovic, of course, in Australia, and in a match that I guess, patterns wise kind of plays out similarly. And yeah, the fact that he was actually that 2-4 game, yeah, it felt like it ended the match. In the end, it wasn't like that, even because Jack definitely had a pretty poor game trying to serve it out. So maybe if he just keeps himself within touching distance, I mean, at 2-4 the match felt very alive, that's for sure.
yeah,
Maybe also considering what happened in the second set, and I don't know, you still had that in mind. Also the VAR, which I know it happened at 15 all. It's only a 15-30, but definitely, contributes to Carlos losing that game more quicker than he would have otherwise. Maybe he would have won it, who knows. But yeah, the match felt very alive, and kind of just some, again, carelessness in the finishing, in the execution on the offense means that it is a double break, and eventually Jack is able to get it done. And obviously it's a great story for him. It's also still the first final at the ATP 1000 level between two players born in the 2000s. The fact that Carlos lost doesn't change that, but from his perspective, yeah, it's now just a few consecutive events when something like that kind of happens to him. And well, I mean, adjustments have to be made at some point in terms of his, I guess, mindset, in terms of his attitude, and well, this should be one of his strengths, getting through players like this in conditions that are very suitable to his game. But yeah, recently it's not like that at all.
yeah. And we've also now gone a whole year where he hasn't, doesn't hold a Masters 1000. So that's also, something. Yeah, I mean, like, if you want to make up ground in the rankings right now, with Sinner out for the next until Rome, basically, for the next 2 months, you kind of have to win matches like this. So, uh, you know, I know he won Rotterdam. He obviously struggled in the match against De Minaur, and he kind of found a way through the semis and the finals without his best stuff. And then, he loses a match against the Hechka where again he's up. He has a chance to go up 5-2 in the third, doesn't take it. You're kind of thinking, okay, he won Rotterdam. It's fine. You can lose to an opponent like this as long as you win Indian Wells. But then, here, yeah, I just think it's a bit of a. It was the ending of the match is definitely some. I mean, the third set is, yeah, he will just have some regrets about that. Obviously, he can correct that by going to Miami, and then, if he wins that, then it doesn't matter really. But this loss is in the past. But for sure, I did kind of feel like throughout the whole week. I mean, throughout the whole week, the tennis was sharp. It was clicking. He was serving great. He was coming through all of his matches rather easily, rather comfortably, just like Jack was. So, I was expecting a much more high quality match than we ended up getting in this one, and instead you got two very uneven sets, and then the VR drama kind of dominated a lot of the early part of the third, and then you just didn't get that. It just doesn't get that same. You don't walk away from it as an Alcaraz fan feeling more reassured about his tennis.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, because of us kind of like doing a very, let's say non-fan content, in the sense that like we're not fanatics, but we're kind of trying
Yeah,
to look at it more objectively and as a neutral, more or less. I think that it's way easier for me to kind of like watch losses like this than it is for like actual, Alcaraz fanatics, for sure. But yeah, I've already seen. We are recording like 2 hours, maybe after, no, not even 2 hours after this match ended, and I've already seen a lot of voices just saying that, like, yeah, he is in a bit of a slump ish. Of course, he's still one of the best players in the world, still very high in the ATP race, but it's just not the kind of domination that he can produce over the rest of the tour. It's not the kind of domination that Yannick Sinner produced last year, definitely not. And while personally, I don't really care if number two, number three in the world. Like I don't. I think these are just numbers, really. And when we get to the slams in the summer, like that's when the pressure will be on. That's when there will be expectations. But obviously, you still want to get there and like high on confidence, high on basically winning a lot, winning titles. And
yeah,
so far losing that, as I called it in the banner that we have on the screen, the stronghold that he had over Indian Wells. Such an incredible win rate here. Basically, ever since he lost to Murray in that first appearance. Obviously, he only had that Rafa loss, which in the early days of 22 that was perfectly fine. That was still an amazing event for him back then, and a free setter with Rafa in these conditions. But since then, he was more or less unplayable in Indian Wells, and also unplayable in the first 4 rounds here. I mean, maybe only Franz Cerundolo came a little close, but it just felt like, despite the new courts in Indian Wells, which, by the way, I think on our previous episode, we didn't even know that yet, that the courts were going to be changed from to Lakehold. That was
Hmm.
obviously something that just before the tournament was discussed so much, and we were thinking that maybe this is sort of like how Świątek and Alcaraz might lose that edge that they usually have over the field in Indian Wells. I think after we've seen the entire week of action, or almost the entire week of action before the finals, we can definitely say that the change in conditions, the jump was not as huge as people were expecting it to be. So I don't think it's really like that much of a factor if we're talking about these
that,
runs for
yeah.
Alcaraz and Świątek at all. So seemed like this is just like straight up like 23, 24. He's unplayable. Basically, I don't see who beats him here. And in the end, yeah, just such a weird match, especially considering what was happening during the entire week and how, yeah, he just looked so clinical, looked like nothing can really like bother him.
Yeah, of course. I would say in the quarterfinal against Toronto, he was down 4-1 in the second set. It was a much more tricky match in terms of the wind, cold, very cold temperatures, conditions, something a bit different. You had to play a little bit of a less risky, more passive approach to that match. And, but still, you never got the feeling that he was in any kind of jeopardy, or that, his title contention was in any kind of serious threat. You knew he would have to raise his level when he played Jack, because Jack just has a base level that's much higher than anybody he played. But yeah, I just didn't. You just recently in some of these matches against Hugo Humbert or Thomas Mahach, or players sort of in between. These are great players. These are players in between 5 and 25 in the world. It speaks to rather the way the ATP landscape is kind of right now, where you can switch the rankings around anywhere from 5 to 30. And if you tell me that, okay, Draper is fourth and Fritz is 13 tomorrow, I would believe it, because there's not that much gap between those kind of players, because you don't have one player dominating right now, and you just kind of have a lot more fluctuations depending on matchups, surface, uh, you know, on any given day. Really, like there's just a lot more volatility at the top of the men's game now.
Yeah, I mean, the state of the ATP Tour right now is very weird, I think.
Yeah.
We're going to see what happens come around Garros, because this was also kind of the case last year, that we were saying, oh, is this the most open French Open in history? And then Alcaraz and
Mm.
Sinner just showed up and dominated. But we're still going to have 3 more ATP 1000s without Sinner.
Yeah,
And right now it's like, okay, so after Sinner, obviously it's Carlos, but he's like, yeah, he's doing fine, just not spectacular. Then we have Zverev, and like, okay, yeah, he loses to Griekspoor, tough opener, but it's also like a month already where he's not at his best at all after the Australian Open final. And after that, as you said, it's just a wild, wild west, really. Thomas Mach or someone like that you mentioned. I mean, he's maybe not even a good example because, like, ELO ratings, he's number 10 or something like that. Jack Draper was like
yeah,
number 5 or 6. They really look the part right now. You could really just
yeah,
swap them around. I think we are also bringing this up before the ATP finals that some of the players that eventually made it into the groups there, so like Deminor, Ruud, Rublev, they're not really all that much more dangerous than, yeah, somebody like Humbert, like Fils, like Draper. And
yeah,
that's only really proving to be true this year. And we have a final between Rune and Draper at the ATP 1000 level. Definitely not the weirdest one we're ever going to get or something like that. But it just kind of very good representation, I think, of the fact that, like, right now there's simply no even like tour leading players other than Carlos. But he's not at the prime of his career. He's still very solid. He's getting deep in every single event, but he's beatable. And Zverev is 10 times more beatable. After that, it's just super open. And even if at the beginning of the season, I remember just being a little like lukewarm on people saying that, yeah, Jack Draper can, I don't know, finish top 5 this year or maybe just be in the top 5. Right now, I honestly can't say that's not a possibility because being the best of the rest at the moment can really just get you to top 5, top 4 easily. Like there's no real like top echelon of the ATP tour at the moment. Again, maybe this will change when Sinner is back. Maybe this will
yeah.
change
I
when
don't think.
we reach the slams again. But for now, super wide open at every single event we get.
Yeah, in terms of these players having their career high, being in the top five, or at some point getting that to that number, that seems very realistic right now. Finishing the year, I mean, that's going to take a little bit more work and more consistency. And once Sinner is back, I assume, and once we get to the slams, then you would sort of expect a little bit more parity. But yeah, it feels like the wild wild west in terms of these events. You're not going to get like Filip Krajinovic in a Masters 1000 final taking on Jack Sock, but it's going to be much more, you know much more reasonable and much more high caliber than that in terms of the players at the top. But it's still wide open and a lot of opportunity knocking for so many players, and this event kind of just showcases that. So yeah, I think that's good that we talked a little bit about the landscape. As far as Alcaraz is concerned, what more would you like to see in terms of adjustments that he's made? Obviously, we've seen there's still a lot of talk about the 5 grams of weight being added to the throat of his racket. The service motion definitely looks different. We still don't have a ton of data on just like in terms of if there's any kind of effectiveness improvements with it. We'll continue to monitor that, obviously. But in terms of the way he kind of played here between the first and the second set, and kind of still how the gap between his ceiling and floor is a little too high, you sort of, what's it going to take to sort of find that middle ground for him where he can rein it in a bit more and then wait for the right moments to pull the trigger? Because I do honestly think he's the kind of player that we're just going to wow at when it does work, and you're not going to question the shot choice. You're just not, because he's so talented, he can pull it off 80-90% of the time. But when you doesn't, then you're going to get a lot of criticism in terms of, oh, was that the right shot? Was that the should you be going for a forehand drop shot in the middle of the court at 40-15? You know, or is that just creating these kind of roller coaster experiences unnecessarily for him when he should be getting through these moments with a lot more comfort?
Hmm. I mean, I think even if he had something like that or like was improving in this department, probably would have been a little bit tough to apply it today. Like there were some rallies when he was recovering nicely. These chords give him
Yeah,
a lot of time, but it's not like he was playing Sinner when, like, last year in Indian Wells we saw, like, he was so set on what he wants to do, and even after getting blown off the court in the opening set, he's got a great game plan and he just executes it to perfection. And here, I mean, yeah, it's just a different opponent. It's an opponent who makes you create more, and it's an opponent who, like, recently a type of opponent that has been kind of losing Carlos a little bit. And yeah, the serve, I think it's before the change of the motion, it was a bit of a lottery in terms of like whether his spot serving on the day was going to be amazing or just like nothing, and that still seems to be the case. That's something we can say, I suppose. Today, the second serve kick wasn't really like eating as much as it usually should, I guess, in Indian Wells either. Maybe that's something that well, I'd have to maybe like look at it a bit more closely, but I think maybe that's something that the new changes have, for now at least, sacrificed a bit. Like that there should be a bit more pace and like effectiveness on the first serve, but maybe not necessarily with the more technical deliveries. But yeah, seems like that ceiling floor disparity you mentioned that we know he has. It's not really coming together just yet. Even if sometimes it seems like it might. Like the 8 sets he played in Indian Wells up until the semis, well, they were like almost perfect. And then to throw in that first set today, 20 something minutes. I know it was also maybe a little different. It was a day match. He hadn't played a day match in a while, right? But yeah, to sort of like throw in a set like this is exactly what he needs to avoid, I suppose.
Yeah, for me, I think he can have sets like this occasionally. When he was at his best and he was winning slams, he did have sets like this. But
In
he
best
did
of
had
five
he had a
play,
first
yes.
set.
In best
He
of
had the
five,
first set like
he
this
can he can
last
avoid
year
it.
against
He can
against
afford it.
Yannick. He had a similar type of first set. But then, and then he gets that second set, and you're kind of thinking, okay, right, now is their time to kind of stamp authority. And then,
Yeah, but is
yeah,
he missing
but
like
I mean,
everything in the opening set against Sinner? He's just late to
no,
respond to the
he's
pace that Sinner is playing with,
yeah. I
right?
think he kind of just struggled to. Whereas here, I do think, yeah, it wasn't a situation here where it was taken out of his hands. It was more he was the one just spraying the balls all over the place. Whereas in the first set yesterday, you could say, I mean, not yesterday, last year, you could say that it was the shot quality of Sinner that was, forcing a lot of errors. That's probably true. But and in some ways, that then forces Alcaraz. He has no other choice but to, play that kind of sound tennis. So in some ways, that does dictate it. But and then also Jack, I feel like he took such good advantage of Carlos's return positions throughout this match. Like whenever Carlos was deep, he was throwing in that slider out wide, and that was killing Carlos every time. When he needed a big point, when he got the free points when he needed them, and then yeah, I mean Alcaraz standing in trying to use the block return, that wasn't very effective in the first set, so he totally abandoned that strategy. Um, but yeah, finding that middle ground is always tricky because he obviously can get a lot of returns back into play. And then sometimes on the second serve return, yeah, it's a bit of a lottery whether he's clinical or not when he does have those opportunities in the rallies. Um, but yeah, I I don't know if it's a slightly different situation to what it is for Iga at the minute, but I do feel like there are some similarities in terms of their mental approach right now, in terms of coming through in clutch moments.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were saying that. I mean, of course, we're gonna get to Iga shortly, but
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, yeah, it's actually pretty similar, these two matches. Simply because
Mm.
of the fact that once they get going in the second set of these semifinal matches,
Yeah.
and once they like feel comfortable, everything is easy, everything is free. But then
Yeah.
the beginning of the third set like isn't quite as smooth,
Mm.
and just executing that game plan, keeping up the good adjustments, it just goes out the window. I think though mentally on the court right now, probably still it's Iga who's struggling more.
Yes. I would agree with
But
that.
but yeah, there are some similarities in terms of how these two matches went, definitely against Draper and Andreeva.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, I'm not sure if there's really that much more to add. We did have Juan Carlos Ferrero back in the box. There was a bit more, tactical advice being thrown his way. I think that was less the case at the Australian Open, less the case I mean, Juan Carlos wasn't with him in February really for these events. It's definitely not Rotterdam. But yeah, I wonder if Juan Carlos is just, dialing it back on purpose. Definitely at
Could
the
be.
Australian Open. We didn't see any adjustments with the return position or tactically really any kind of major coaching. Whereas here, it was there was some, but definitely not when Alcaraz first came on the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen comments like, as I always say, like we don't really know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah,
It's very hard to like rate the work of a coach. We almost never can like affect realistically do this. But I've seen some opinions like, it's pretty clear that Ferrero is kind of like struggling to get through to him with some things, and that seems to be, that seems pretty legit. Like whatever they're trying to do, whatever sort of like changes in this approach to matches like this, to opponents like this, to dynamics of play like this, whatever they're trying to do about it, yeah, it just seems like it's not really sticking, especially when the pressure is high. I'm not saying that that means, he should definitely find someone else, fire Ferrero or something like that. But I can understand people being a bit frustrated with the fact that it doesn't seem like there's like major progress in his game recently.
yeah, that's for sure. Um, and obviously, we have to understand that the standards are extremely high with Alcaraz just because of the meteoric rise that he had in 22, and just the fact that he won those that he's won these majors early. There's always going to be these lulls and periods of adjustment, but it does feel like the highs and lows. You know, there's a lot of them right now, and at some point he is too good of a player that I do think when he finds that right balance, when he just finds that ability, because he's still so entertaining, he's still just so you know so raw. It feels like I can almost recycle my commentary for a lot of these losses and kind of just in terms of the broad picture, like it's very similar. It's just it's just about it clicking and finding that balance on the right day. And that's very much the kind of player that it is. I mean, we mentioned last time that it's kind of a more stressful experience to watch Alcaraz versus Świątek. It's kind of a more, especially in earlier rounds, it's very kind of clinical and efficient, and then kind of then it's like, okay, now let's see. Now we have a really big opponent in front of us. Now how does she handle that? Whereas, for Alcaraz, maybe sometimes you have a little more faith that he can rise to the occasion in some of the bigger matches. But yeah, there are some similarities and differences for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty fair to say. Whenever you're watching like an early round of Carlos, you always have this thought at the back of your mind that like, this can go wrong at any
Yeah,
given moment. Like there's no real reason why this has to be just a beatdown until the end. There's a lot of Iga matches where you watch the first 5 games and you're just okay, yeah. I mean, it's done. It's toast. But yeah, in the end, I guess they both ended up in the semis in like similar fashion, more or less, because it was so
yeah,
comfortable, and then they both lost in similar fashion too.
yeah, for sure. And like I said, I decided beforehand. Sometimes I like to wait until these tournaments are over when they lose early, just to kind of see if there's any kind of bigger picture topics. For this one with Holger Rune and Daniil Medvedev, I didn't feel like that was really the case because it doesn't really kind of impact the direction where Alcaraz is headed. But nonetheless, I am excited to see that final. I am interested to see.
Holger could
Uh,
Holger could impact the direction, right? I mean, depending
yeah,
on what he does after Indian Wells.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, in terms of it, like sometimes if it's like, I don't know, Sinner versus Zverev or something, or like it's they're close in the rankings, and then you have some kind of a maybe a ranking threshold that or in the race or some there's usually a bigger story associated with it. Whereas for this one, yeah, I mean it's still a great story if Holger can kind of bounce back. He was kind of part of the new big three for a while, a couple of years ago, and then obviously Draper is the bigger story trying to get his first one. But yeah,
I keep thinking back to this because I don't know if
any
you
thoughts on that?
participated, but I think it was after the US Open 23
Mhm. Yeah.
when Mert Ertunga on Twitter, he like announced basically that well, in 2000, let's just say this. In 2019, I think he asked people like who was going to be the number 1 and number 2 on both tours in 2023. And then
Okay.
in 2023 he did the same for 27. And I in 2019 I didn't like I wasn't that active on Twitter yet. I didn't participate. However,
Uh-huh.
I did in 2023, and I
Yes.
placed Rune as my number two. I think this is
Uh-huh.
post US Open 2027. So, Holger, you really have to get your, what together. By the way, my number two pick for the women was Mira Andreeva. So
Okay, maybe you're onto something. Yeah,
maybe
maybe
at least
that's what will age.
on one of the tours, I will be right.
Yeah, maybe that will age really well. They share the same birthday, by the way. So
Mira and
yeah,
Holger? Okay, interesting.
yes, yes.
I mean, I knew it's
Um,
more or less in the same, vicinity, but
yeah, we were actually one match away from both the finals being, May 5th versus April 29th. But yeah,
Jesus, that's a
we
very
didn't
Vanch
get
stat.
that.
Yeah, it's a shame we didn't get
Yes.
that.
I tweeted it just in case it might happen.
Oh, you
So yeah,
did tweet it anyway. Okay, yeah,
yes,
that's. I understand that sentiment. Like sometimes when a stat is this good, you
yes,
still, yeah, you have to basically.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
once
I would,
recently I did this like I don't know like 5 hours of research trying to find how many challenger finals, if any, were ever
yeah,
contested between brothers, and that was before the Delian brothers played their semifinals that day. And I was
yeah,
just like, no, I have to tweet about this. Probably they're not gonna make it. In fact, they didn't. I think only Hugo
yeah.
did, and Murkel lost. But the research, I just had to do it anyway.
Yeah, for me it's just similar. I was like, I have to get this out there, even if it doesn't happen. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep tonight. I'll have regrets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but
Well, someone who might not be well, not tonight, but someone who has
yeah,
some regrets about Indian Wells. Let's get to Iga Świątek.
yeah. I mean, like we said, the earlier rounds here were very convincing for her. Against Garcia and yeah, Yastremska. There's just really not that much to talk about. It's just the courts favoring her tremendously. Obviously just extremely clinical. Gets on top of you early. The opponent kind of has no idea how to combat it. Really come back from these losing situations. I thought the Junction win match was big at the time, just to kind of get it over, just because she lost at the Olympics, just to kind of get a win. And you saw when Iga is in her full flow that she is just a better player and just is able to you know yeah, like you could just totally see how much nerves were getting in the way of that performance at the Olympics. And here she was up 5-1 in both those sets. She got pegged back to 5-3, but yeah, she was just so much the better player in that match. So coming into the semis, yeah, we were all really excited. We were all pretty high on Mira, just in general, coming to the semis the way she did, backing up the title that she had in Dubai. And the performance against Rybakina was just crazy good. Even if Rybakina made like 33 unforced errors, and the conditions really didn't favor her at all, she also beat Clara Towson in a similar manner. These really big hitters where she just places these shots perfectly. She sends it back with power of her own. She's beefed up that first serve tremendously the last 1 year, and all the kind of things that we already knew about her in terms of her ability to construct points, always choose the right shot at the right time, those kind of instinctual decisions that she makes on the whim. Yeah, she's just very tactically astute out there. And against Iga in Dubai, she used that forehand slice extremely well, brought Iga to the net, just kept pressing her with these down the line shots, just had a clear game plan, and the conditions helped her execute it perfectly. But I was very curious to see how it would happen on these conditions in this kind of environment. And we got a very interesting first set between the two, where Mira surfed at 5-4, and then Świątek played a really awesome defensive point too in that game where she ended up breaking back. And you're thinking, all right, here we go, game on. And but yeah, the way that first set ended and how quickly Iga dominated the second, I was kind of hoping, I kind of raised my expectations a lot more for Iga in the third. And unfortunately, the third to me in some ways was even more disappointing than the third that Alcaraz played today, just because yeah, there were some serious mental lapses or serious moments where she lost her emotions and her control, and in a way that I haven't seen before from her in quite some time. So yeah, and right now I think it's just a tough one because she hasn't won a title since Roland Garros. Aside from the United Cup final, there hasn't been any finals either in those 10 tournaments. So
Is the
yeah,
United Cup a final? That's my favorite discussion over the last few days.
yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, for the purposes of this podcast, I mean, we can mention it for sure. It's a team event, so Yeah, and it obviously comes with the asterisk, but still, in terms of the opponents that she beat along the way, like against Rybakina and Bolter and Bohova, these are quality opponents that she beat. So
Yeah, I do kind of struggle to say that she hasn't made a final since Roland Garros, because the way that like the United Cup is structured, if you
yeah,
only look at the singles matches, it's kind of tough to argue against it being a final for her. In just mindset wise, like I'm not saying it's going to be on the official records, or nor I'm saying that it should be. But basically, yeah, I do think it was pretty similar. Just like I would count the United Cup as a sort of singles title for Coco Gauff, because, well, she won 5 matches against strong opposition. Like, how is that different to winning a WTA 500 or WTA 250 in that week?
mm,
But yeah, this match against Andreeva, for sure, I was just so excited. For best, sort of like most difficult opponent for Iga since Rybakina in 23 in Indian Wells. 24, we know that this campaign, while really impressive and just total domination over the field, I think that Iga would have won Indian Wells 2024 regardless who she played against.
yeah,
But well, in the end, it was Kostyuk in the semis, it was Wozniacki in the quarters, it was Sakari in the final. Obviously, not the toughest lineup that you can possibly get. And we know that Iga generally like smashes anybody who's not from the very top. So I was very excited to see her play someone, let's say real. And then in the final, that would have been, of course, as well, either Sabalenka or Keys. So, well, in the end, we know that it's Sabalenka, but when Iga was playing. So I just knew that we had one or possibly two very tough, very challenging, but also very entertaining from a viewing perspective matches lined up. And in the end, I guess, in a way, I wasn't disappointed. I loved the like feisty, aggressive second serve response. It just felt like, she knows that she completely just turned off in the breaker, which doesn't, by the way, happen to her for the first time recently. Noskova tiebreak, I guess, was very similar in Doha. And basically, yeah, she loses that 7-1. Mira doesn't really make any mistakes, but the serving from Iga is absolutely horrible in the breaker. And
yeah,
well, she just loses it like in 3 minutes, really. And I just loved the response. The only thing that basically I was like just afraid of when the decider came around was, well, how does she keep doing this if the scoreline isn't as favorable from the very beginning? Like, and that's kind of what happened to her. And unfortunately, yeah, the mental performance, I think that's the main downside of the entire thing. Just the fact that she wasn't able to keep up the adjustments, keep up the level of aggression, that the balls that he or she was handling like very comfortably earlier, suddenly they become increasingly difficult, especially anything short that she was just like putting away in the second set and basically making Andreeva, yeah, just punishing her for anything that she left short. This was also a big difference compared to the Dubai match, that there was far less like short slice, passing shot type play from Mira. Of course, this is also based on the conditions. Anytime she tried to do something like this in the second set, the point was over. Iga was just going to hit a winner and like not even have to follow it up with a volley. And the
mm,
third set, suddenly she starts making a mess of it. Also, the last game, like that's one thing that I also remember, 30 love, it doesn't feel like the match is over, kind of just like with Carlos, right? But from
yeah.
30 love, she makes pretty much like 4 errors, especially the last 2 points, just completely cheap, completely for free. And it's unfortunately a bit of a pattern now that yeah, the last 6 months or so, mentally, Iga is not really delivering in the key moments. I long for
Mm.
the days of the Osaka Roland Garros win or the Sabalenka Madrid win. That's it, really.
Yeah, I felt the same way watching these semifinal performances lately. Especially, I just feel like she's gotten increasingly frustrated as well against Ostapenko, against Andreeva in both these losses. That she has sort of, yeah, displayed her frustration on the court very viscerally, and I don't think it's been good for her. In terms of the way she's then approaching the next few points, because she goes down. I think the first game was very costly as well. She hits a double fault, and she's hitting some double faults in some more big moments. That's one thing also that I've noticed with Alcaraz as well. I mean, that could also just be getting used to the new serve, but that's another thing. I am seeing a few more double faults from them in bigger moments. Something to monitor as well. Um, But yeah, the fact that she couldn't keep up that second set momentum and then she gets broken early, but then she has these chances at 2-1 as well, love 30, 15-30, where she like gets to the drop shot, and then like she should have done way more with the first volley, doesn't do enough. And then yeah, she kind of just she loses that game and then it carries over to the next game and we see a little bit more frustration where she hits a ball in anger and it almost hits the ball kid, and that goes viral. And all of a sudden, obviously, we have the usual suspects who don't like Iga anyway on social media, and they're going to post that. It's going to get amplified to 1,000th degree, and yeah, and then unfortunately, she just spirals, and then she loses that. She loses her serve again. She goes down double break. Just like Carlos, she gets one of the breaks back, and you're thinking, okay, hold your serve at 3-5, and that's exactly right, 30 love, and basically four errors, pretty cheap way to close out the match. Now, I will say Andreeva was doing a phenomenal job with her disguise on her shots when she was having to direct the Świątek power, because there were so many instances where Świątek just could not read the backhand on the line that Andreeva hit. There were so many ones that are sort of short, that are skidding a little bit on these courts, because when it does hit the line, it tends to skid a lot more, especially with this new surface that they have now in place in Lakewood. I mean, surely it hasn't made any impact whatsoever on the actual speed, I don't think. Definitely, that's most people's opinion. But I do feel like when it hits the line, it hits the court at a much higher speed than maybe it did before. But there was still so many backhands that Mira was just timing like perfectly, and Iga wasn't even close to reading them. And when she was, it's kind of tough with her forehand grip, I feel like, to get underneath those lower balls. So that's one thing that Andreeva I thought did like so well, and it was just so difficult for Iga to get any kind of a read on in some big moments, and that just frustrated Iga even more. And also whenever Mira needed a free point, just like Jack, she was always hitting her spots. So that's something that I have to give her a lot of credit for as well, because the serve is just like a completely big weapon, a huge weapon now in her game that just wasn't there like even 2 months ago, really. So that's
Yeah, it
been
was
that's
it
been
was
huge.
10 aces in Dubai, and we were
Yeah,
thinking like, how's it gonna look in Indian Wells? Is it still going to be a factor? Obviously, Iga's serve
huge
was like
factor.
a little less attackable too, but it was a massive factor. I
Yeah,
think maybe even for a player like Andreeva or for anyone really trying to pull off that sort of play style, having an improved serve is an even bigger deal. Like if you're basically one of the best baseline players in the world, then suddenly that 1 3 point per game or thereabouts, like that's even more. That just means that you're going to be more or less unbeatable. And yeah, as much as we can criticize Iga's like mindset here and the performance, especially from a mental perspective, despite the rush that she played with in the second set, the sense of urgency, Andreeva was pretty phenomenal too. She's such an excellent defender. We know that, but at the same time, yeah, the improvements in terms of her serve, just being a little bit more aggressive with the forehand too when she gets the
yeah,
chance. Very good sense of like direction, tennis IQ, angles. Whenever she's finally in control of the point, she's like basically wrong footing Iga on the second or third shot right away. The back and down the line, yeah, it's I think maybe sometimes it wasn't even the reading it thing, but basically just she was so out of position that you're thinking she cannot be landing this line time and time again, and she is.
yeah,
Every single time is like the trajectory of it is just spotless. It doesn't really matter where she is on the court. It's just gonna be like a straight line, it doesn't matter. And
yeah,
that of course included also a smash defense when Iga perhaps can do a little bit more. But once more, even though the ball is like, shifting pretty quickly, like going away from the court, Andreeva just lines up on it and it's perfect. Again, it like there's no there's no fluctuation. The ball isn't like really meandering anywhere. No, it's just
yeah.
straight up down the line. What a ridiculous shot that is. What a ridiculous player that is. I don't know if she's going to beat Sabalenka because we again are going to be recording. Well, we are recording this before the finals,
For this one,
but
I do think actually for Iga's case, it
it,
matters a
it
little bit
matters
more
more, yes.
than
And
for Carlos, just because of the state. Like these are the four best players right now, and if Andreeva were to now go and beat Sabalenka, which she hasn't beaten a healthy version of, that now changes. That makes it very, very interesting for everybody now.
I think it's going to be the best match that she's played against Arena.
Mm.
I am discounting the Roland Garros one because of the
Yeah, yeah,
stomach.
me too.
I'm sorry if some people feel that like maybe I'm putting a little bit too much weight on it. To me, it was very clear from the get go there that Arena wasn't feeling okay, and that
Yeah,
like at the time Mira didn't really have anything to contest her with. And honestly, in January, Mira didn't have anything to contest her with. But now
Right.
that I've watched her play in Dubai and Indian Wells, I think that's no longer true. And especially
Yeah.
again, this is a matchup where the improved serve will be massive too. Slow court in this matchup, I guess, could help her do sort of like a thousand Rybakina ish thing. Um, yeah, I think she's got a pretty good shot.
I do too, and it's gonna be. And if she does win, I mean, that will be like two big tournaments in a row where the player who's won has had to go through. Świątek, Rubikina, Sabalenka, Svitolina as well. So like doing this 4 times in a row. I mean, yeah, maybe just like the Australian Open, it makes you feel a little bit better about Iga. But I just feel like the Iga of 2024 when she was clutching out those wins against Naomi and Sabalenka, maybe she finds a way through a match like this. She's just low on confidence because she hasn't been winning these type of matches lately. And mentally, I feel like her tennis is there, but I feel like mentally is more the problem. It's more mental. This kind of a performance, I would say. It's less about the
We've seen
tennis.
her.
The,
We've
the
seen her
tennis
getting
is very
tense
capable.
in a lot of matches this year. I don't think the
Yeah.
United Cup was really that big a deal yet. I mean, Goff was at that point the best player on the planet. There were some games in the second set when Iga was behind on the scoreboard when she was just like hitting ridiculous shots, and basically it was still not enough. But yeah, since then it feels like a lot of these losses they do have a very like important mental element to it. And I guess, yeah, I don't know if she would have beaten Andreeva if she wins that 3-5 game, but you gotta give yourself these chances, at least give the opponent a chance to falter potentially. And
Yeah.
that's not happening. And yeah, just feels like if Iga was playing, maybe I'll twist what you just said around. And like if Iga was playing the match against Osaka or Sabalenka tomorrow, I think she would lose. And that's,
That match, yeah. If she plays that
yeah.
match that she
If she
plays,
plays that match
I
from
agree.
last year against either, I
I
don't
agree.
think she hits the same return against Naomi on the match point. I don't think again, against Arena it was also like pretty much +1 points, right? I,
Yeah.
I don't think this works out for her in the same way. I don't think she keeps, that sort of like high school attitude about it. And yeah, the frustration is getting very, very visible on the court too, which I imagine,
Yes.
I haven't seen it actually yet, but I imagine it will once again kind of like raise a lot of conversation about the work of Daria Abramovic, which again, no idea how it actually
Yeah,
is
yeah.
behind closed doors because we cannot compare it to a state of no Daria Abramovic,
Yeah.
right? So like, how can we actually say if it's better or worse
No,
without her?
we
But
can't say. I feel
but
very
I know that
uncomfortable
people will be talking
having.
about it simply because yeah, I mean the
Yeah.
mental side of Iga's game right now is looking very poor.
Yes. All I can say is that she's much more than a psychologist. That's much is pretty obvious when it comes to, yeah, just I mean how visible she is when it comes to giving feedback on the court in real time and just how intense the dynamic looks between them right now. And yeah, it's tough for a coach like Wim to come in and have like a huge impact. When you have just like this dominating presence in your box, who's known Ego for over 4 or 5 years. They kind of do everything together, whether it's press or like outside the court. Like she's kind of like the main figurehead in that camp. Even though like obviously the you know Wim is kind of hired to, yeah, make Ego feel more comfortable in those matchups that she was struggling in last year. But I just feel like when Ego is stressed out like this, when she's mentally, you know, doesn't when she's mentally not as on in those really big moments and doesn't have the confidence, then she kind of reverts back to type, and that type is uh, ball bashing, honestly. And we saw quite a lot of that at times. But I do think also it's just there was a clutchness missing here in this performance that wasn't the case in 2024, and
Yeah, I
it's
remember
down to
watching
a lot of
this
reasons.
third set and just seeing images from the Iga box and just
Yeah,
looking at Fisset and thinking, I kind of feel sorry for him because like
yeah,
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 Iga is just like straight up blowing this third set completely. What is he supposed to do? Like people are still going to kind of like judge him based on her performances because that's how it works. If someone is doing well, you praise the coach. If someone is doing poorly, you blame them.
yeah.
But I mean, that's not only tennis. That's basically any sport. And I was just thinking, like, he definitely has nothing to say here. Like, he's just sitting there. I think he did sort of like, the studying before the match part, the game plan. Like, there was no real, like, big issues with that. I think Iga knew what she like had to do against Mirra. It's just she's unable to execute it because she's so frustrated, she's so angry, she's so nervous in the first set. And at that point, the coach can just kind of sit there, and there's nothing that he can do other than like literally keep his fingers crossed and maybe try to, bring some sort of either calming presence or the other way, just come on, let's go or whatever. But there's really nothing else he can do at that point. And by the way, yeah, you mentioned, of course, that I guess I should say a word or two about that as well. The ball kid incident. I mean, sometimes we were talking about, let's say, the behavior of Igar was rubbing some people the other, the wrong way, and well, not excusing it, but basically telling you why, in our opinion, it's like not quite as big as some painted. This is kind of like, yeah, it's inexcusable. It's
Yeah,
like the Putintseva US Open ball kid situation, of course. Well, almost went very wrong. If that ball hits the ball kid, I'm sure it's a default, and well, should not happen. And basically, the safety, the happiness of the ball kids who are working for free, of course, that's one of the most important things. So yeah, not ideal. Hopefully, won't happen again.
yeah, that's kind of my stance on it as well. Like, there's no defense for Iga in terms of behaving like that and coming so close to, yeah, potentially endangering a ball kid and, yeah, defaulting herself from that situation, from that match, and then that potentially then has a big impact on, yeah, her legacy, her the rest of her season, the rest of her kind of mental approach going forward, separating that incident. Yeah,
Yeah, we
I
saw
mean, she definitely avoided.
what this did to Rublev last year, for example, right? Like
Yes,
the
it
defaulting
basically
high.
destroyed him for a few months. So,
Yeah, he has been struggling
that's,
mentally ever since. We don't know how much of it is just that situation, but it most certainly didn't help, and he had
yeah,
to like really come to terms. So of course, in this case, Iga wasn't defaulted, but in a way, she was kind of like more, well, closer, I guess, to hurting somebody than Rublev was. So yeah, I mean, hopefully, like after the fact, she will be able to look back at this incident and just make sure that it never happens again.
yep. On the final a little bit, Miro Andreeva against Sabalenka. We have seen Sabalenka um in this rivalry has just been able to overpower Mira, and there hasn't been that's basically been it. There hasn't been anything Mira's been able to do to effectively use her excellent defense and redirecting skills and all this really great tennis IQ because she's been robbed of that time. But on these courts, the way she's been playing right now, the last 11 months, you do feel like she comes into this match with a big chance actually of doing something pretty big. Of all the pressure is all on Sabalenka here to win this title, to continue to dominate this rivalry. Like, this is a match that you come in for the first time feeling really excited about because at some point there's no way Sabalenka can go like 10 matches in a row without losing to Mira. Like it's I just don't see a world where that happens.
Yeah, it's 4-1. Of course, Round Garros, I already mentioned the stomach bug and everything. 4 matches that were not interesting at all. Two of them, I think, Madrid, so pretty fast clay, and of course, two of them this year in January. And I do think these conditions will be a little bit better, and just allowing Andreeva to maybe handle weather the storm a little bit more. Yeah, it was that crazy weight of shot that Sabalenka has of both wings that was just like not allowing Mira to do anything really. But especially if she can combat it with the 3 points on serve now as well, if that is maintained after the Iga matches and basically any match she's played over the last 2-3 weeks, that's so massive too. If she can just have a supply of points that before wasn't really there, and basically she just had to rely on Sabalenka missing a ton. I think in Australia we saw that Sabalenka was mostly struggling with players who were just like rushing her the entire time. So Pavlyuchenkova, Towson, Keys, and someone like Andreeva just didn't bother her whatsoever, or Badosa later in the semis. And I think in Indian Wells it might be a bit different. Of course, for now we haven't really seen Sabalenka struggle with anybody, but just the way that Andreeva has been playing and all the improvements she's made, it seems like now she should be way better prepared.
Yeah. I do feel like she has more tools and more confidence at her disposal than a couple of months ago in those matches in Australia. So that should be interesting to see from a neutral perspective how that looks. Besides from that, I mean, tactically as well, I read a lot of comments online that Iga on the return of serve still sends way too far in, still doesn't kind of, and I kind of have to agree because there's so many times where I do feel like that then bleeds into her service games as well when she has like 115 120 bombs coming at her, especially down the tee, and that if she just gave herself a little bit more time to be effective, to let the return drop a little bit, or find the right sweet spot, it would be a lot easier, it would be a lot tougher for her opponents to gain the advantage.
Then again, end of the second set, it seems like even the first serve of Andreeva is getting demolished, right? But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it's just a question of like consistency against peak moments.
Mm.
And peak moment was definitely there. Unfortunately, it was just a moment.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just so interesting to watch Ika play from 2019 to 2021 and see the kind of variety that she had in terms of using the drop shots, using a bit more feel. Her technique was a little bit different as well, on the serve and everything. And it's just, yeah, it's like Wiktorowski came in. He had a very clear vision on like, this is how you have to play. This is your plan A. This is like how you're going to dominate, and it works. But now there's just like there's some more wrinkles and adjustments that just have to be made over time. And yeah, maybe it's just a process, and we won't see these things for a while. And maybe it's just all about her mentality. Maybe that is just the missing part of the puzzle in some of these events that she's supposed to win.
It certainly
And
felt like that here. Like I think this was the first event where we can really say this was like 100% the case.
yeah,
There was nothing wrong with the game part.
yeah, because I do feel like in general, you watch her play Mahova, you watch her play Rabakina, you watch her play some of the players she used to struggle against, and she is making those adjustments. She is coming through in these matches. She is, I mean, she dominated Mahova. That match was not close. She, she has convincingly come through against Rabakina in Doha, even though second set got a bit tighter. But still, like, so you can't say that her tennis is not really there. It's more just the mental part in the big moments, and I think she's very well aware of that. And I think that in some ways that's a good way to look at it if you're looking for a glass half full. But in all honesty, as I started with this show, yeah, this for the Iga and Carlos show to be a success at Indian Wells, they both had to pretty much win the title. That's what we were going for.
We certainly expected like one of them to probably deliver, and
Yeah,
well, the other was going to be the main favorite too. So why not both? But yeah, to lose both of them in the on the semifinal day, I did not expect that really. But well, just we'll see how they do in Miami now. Of course, because we're recording this still on Saturday, we won't know the draws yet. Typically, it's an event where once there was an Iga Carlos double before an
yeah,
Iga Carlos show was even established. I
mhm,
think the 2022 edition definitely like the courts kind of played in favor of Iga and Carlos a little bit more than maybe in other editions, but yeah, why not? We talked about the landscape on the ATP tour being so open. That might as well mean that the chance for Carlos is maybe better than previous years. He's not coming in after the Indian Wells title. So last year, I think that definitely contributed to the loss. Maybe for Iga as well. She was a little bit more tired than she will be this time around.
yeah,
Should be pretty exciting, yeah. On the WTA, though, I think the landscape is a bit different in that we have like 6, 7 players who are like, well, actually, yeah, 6, 7 players who are very confidently ahead of the rest of the field right now,
yes,
and probably one of them is going to take the title. And I do think, of course, Iga is in that group.
yeah, yeah. It's been very interesting to see who's been winning the big titles on the WTA and how that's going to keep shuffling, and what the top four looks like 2 3 months from now, because there is quite a lot of there is a lot more stability where you can definitely draw a line, which isn't the case on the men's side. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of the way yeah, the sport night is gone for Iga and Carlos, as well as the tour landscape overall. And yeah, I will actually be in Miami. So if you are in Miami as well, anybody listening, please feel free to come and say hi. You know where to find me, of course, on Twitter at Vanchvi2K. Luckily, I got that account back
Finally,
before
yes,
I started
because
recording this.
actually a
So
week ago that wasn't true, right?
yeah, it wasn't true. So I got hacked, and luckily, I managed to use resources I had, and I managed to get it back. So I'm pretty happy about that, obviously. And yeah, you can also follow us at Iga Carlos Tennis. And some moment, we can't promise this yet, but I was thinking at some point in the clay swing, we will maybe do some kind of a live commentary of an Iga and Carlos match, and then we'll have that up for you guys on the YouTube channel as well. So yeah, I think it's going to be exciting times ahead for the show, and yeah, we've got a good presence now on YouTube as well. So that's thank you to everybody who's been subscribing to that. Make sure you do that if you haven't already, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. And we'll be back in 2 weeks to wrap up Miami. So till then, yeah, thank you, Damien.
Thank you. And I guess I can also give a small follow up on the Beijing King Cup that I've been talking about. Is that, well, basically they announced 4 players out of the lineup. So number 5 is going to be announced later, which I think to me is a clear indication that they are like trying to get Iga on board, but they aren't sure yet. I guess her performance in Miami might as well contribute too. But it could be an opportunity for me to see Iga playing live this year, but we'll see if that works out. But
And
yeah, I think
what are the
they're
what are
gonna
the dates
announce
for
it
that?
like way
What
later.
are, what are the what are the dates for that tie? Just
10th, 12th, yeah, 10th to 12th April. Poland plays on the 10th and on the 11th. And it's just before Stuttgart, and the courts are like perfectly mimicking the conditions. It's the same technology, same manufacturer, which again to me is like, yeah, clearly they want Iga to be on board. We'll see if she is, but yeah, they just announced the 4 other players on the team, and the 5th name is supposed to come later, which well, you know what they're doing exactly with that. I think she will probably play. Honestly, I mean, especially if it's the same courts in Stuttgart. Like, what's the
yeah,
drawback really? So we'll see. But
yeah,
yeah, I think I'm gonna come either way. Bencic is in the Swiss team. Svitolina is in the Ukrainian team. So I think I'll probably travel there. Either way, it's like 500, 450 kilometers from me, so it's not the closest, but it's also still in Poland, so relatively cheap for me, I guess, to travel to for the weekend. It's Thursday, Saturday. Anyway,
yeah,
we'll probably know more on that after Miami, or maybe even at a later date. We'll see. But yeah, thank you, I guess.
yep. Thank you, and yeah, thanks for that information. That'll be a good experience if you do get to go. So